Good afternoon. In this presentation, I present the case of academic help-seeking behavior based on a review reported by Lee and colleagues in the 2023 article, in which they offer multiple areas of future research on the topic. I then provide methodological illustrations of how one could approach suggested research areas from the standpoint of recommendations I made in a presentation last year at this conference, calling for an overhaul of how psychologists conduct research toward achieving a cumulative psychological science devoid of rampant failures to replicate. In my presentation last year, I had recommended that a new approach that refocuses on processes instead of rampant use of hypothetical constructs was called for. The new approach involves a synergy of eclectic methods in psychology that will be informed by processes and not just statistics. In the new approach, research questions, not inferential statistical considerations, will dictate research design. Any research question may be addressed using either or both large N or small n designs, including large N without inferential statistics. Interest in population parameters dictates use of group designs, not by default. Research interest in exploratory questions or theoretical testing dictates use of NHST or Bayesian statistics, respectively. In this presentation, I identify additional analytical tools in addition to the previous focus on NHST and Bayesian statistics. Lee and colleagues provided a comprehensive review of the literature on academic help-seeking behavior of college students. Their review included studies from nearly 20 countries, although most of them were from the United States of America. The 55 articles reported in the review employed 5 categories of research, including quantitative, qualitative, mixed, quasi-experimental, and experimental designs. 78% were quantitative, only 15% were qualitative. There is a clear paucity of experimentation on this topic, with only 1 each, quasi-experimental and experimental designs. The 4 categories outlined by Lee and colleagues for future research provide an organizing framework for generating research questions. As we shall see, not all categories they identified warrant actual research questions. For example, the methodological category that calls for additional approaches is indirectly addressed by the eclectic nature of the process approach adopted here. So, how do we proceed? The standard research cycle begins with generating hypotheses, which then leads to selection of a design that is followed by data collection, data analysis and interpretation, and reporting of findings at a conference or publication, which may lead to theories and hopefully new generation of new hypotheses. In the process method approach, the starting point in the research cycle is the research question, which initiates a design question whether the study is going to be extensive or intensive. which is usually determined by the goal, estimating population parameters or interest in individual processes. When a group design is used because of interest in population parameters, the statistical requirement to be made are dictated by the nature of the experiment, whether it's exploratory or theoretical. If it is theoretical, NHST is recommended. If it is exploratory, NHST is recommended. If it is theoretical, the Bayesian analysis is recommended. I should say, if interest is in individual processes and requires repeated measures of the individual, then a small n design is what is indicated. So I'm going to apply this approach to the study of academic help-seeking behavior. Before the illustration, however, let me briefly take a closer look at the large N methodology. As I said before, if interest is in population parameter and we choose a group design, if the study is exploratory, we use NHST, but if it is theoretical, we use Bayesian analysis. Well, it is in addition possible that we're interested in comparative outcomes between groups. Trafimore and colleagues have developed the gain probability analysis, which can also handle theoretical testing in addition to exploration. When the goal does not involve population parameter estimation, a group design is not indicated, but a large N design without inferential statistics. A modern version of this approach would use Grice et al.'s person as effect size measures. These additional approaches that I've introduced to analytical tools will be detailed in the written version of this presentation. So how do we proceed? Well, we begin with research questions, not statistical hypotheses. Here are some potential research questions derived from the framework provided by Lee et al. Future research recommendations. How do students define academic help-seeking behavior? What type of assistance do faculty provide to students? How do students choose between formal and informal sources? Or how do they choose between face-to-face and online? What is the effect of individual characteristics like age, gender, experience on help-seeking behavior? What effect of cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds have on academic help-seeking behavior? And finally, what is the effect of academic self-efficacy, other people and environments, and different instructor characteristics on students' help-seeking behavior? Based on these questions, what follows is I'm going to do research. What kind of research design do we choose based on the questions? I address this question for each of the potential research questions next. Beginning with the first research question, how do students define academic help-seeking behavior? The nature of the question, how do they define it, suggests that it has to be an extensive study using survey study to determine what students think. The second question is what types of assistance are offered to students by faculty and what is their impact on help-seeking behavior? Again, because of the nature of the question, an extensive study is indicated, survey what faculty provide to the students. As to the third question about student choice between formal and informal sources of academic assistance, it can be both extensive and intensive. It can be extensive if interest is in parameter estimation, in which case we could start with a between subject comparison. For example, we could do a comparison of no assistance, formal assistance, and informal assistance for different group of subjects. That would be a between subject group design. Or it could be a within subject group design, in which all subjects experience all conditions of the experiment, beginning with no exposure to any form of assistance, formal assistance, and then informal assistance, or vice versa, depending on the counterbalancing sort. It can also be intensive if we're interested in individual choice processes. In this case, we will use a small n design, or particularly multiple choice, because of the nature of the question. There are various small n designs, some of which will be detailed in the written version of the presentation. The multiple baseline design is the choice design here because of the nature of the behavior. Once a student has developed help-seeking behavior, one will not want to stop by reversing the condition to a baseline, as will be required in a reversal design. The delayed introduction of the second treatment, going to informal help-seeking behavior, allows the acquired behavior in the formal sector to continue while still assessing experimentally the effect of the new intervention. Here's a more complicated multiple baseline design, where the first two students are involved. You can have more students, but the first one experiences formal, then informal. The delay allows for assessment of continuing lack of use and assumption of use of formal before the informal is introduced for the second student, and so on. The next question is, how do students choose between in-person and online sources of assistance? Again, extensive versus intensive. It can be extensive if parameter estimation is of interest. And we could have a between subject example where a group of subjects are exposed to no assistance at all, formal assistance, and then informal assistance, different groups. Can also be within subjects design, in which case all subjects experience all conditions. So you may begin with no exposure to assistance at all, then formal assistance and informal assistance, and vice versa, depending on counterbalancing sort. Again, if we are interested in the choice processes of the individual students, we can use intensive. Again, a multiple baseline is recommended, and we use in-person, for example, to start with, delayed over online introduction. And the same could be repeated for two or more students to see the impact of introducing help-seeking behavior in a systematic way for different subjects. The next question, what is the effect of individual characteristics like age, sex, experience on academic help-seeking behavior? It can be extensive. If it is, we need a between group design, such as for sex and experience, male and female against 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, or 4 year experience in college, and different groups would occupy each cell. On the other hand, we could have age versus experience, different age of students against number of years in college. Within group design, it's not feasible for this question because the question targets group variables. And indeed, that eliminates the potential for using small n designs as well. The next question is, what is the effect of cultural and socioeconomic background on help-seeking behavior? Extensive interest, if we are interested in parameter estimation, we use a group design, in which case, in this particular example, we explore help type, formal, informal, or none at all, against socioeconomic background, low income, medium income, or upper income, and different groups who experience each. Finally, what is the effect of academic self-efficacy, other people and environments, and instructor characteristic of the help-seeking behavior? If interest is in parameter estimation, between subject design requires that we manipulate self-efficacy high or low against peers, family, teacher, or teaching assistant, for example. Or, on the other hand, we could have self-efficacy against environment, the home environment, in school, and online. Again, we do group design. It's not feasible here because the question targets group variables. So, how do we handle conflict? It is influenced by the research question, not just statistical considerations. For each of the analytical tools for the group designs identified earlier, we will now consider pre-data collection and post-data collection procedures that each requires. For null hypothesis statistical testing, pre-data and post-data issues involve, for example, specifying ahead of time alpha and or p-value, specifying the relevant population for the estimation of parameters, determining normality, power analysis to determine the sample size, and finally, random sampling, not just convenience sample as is commonly done. Post-data procedure simply requires that we determine the p-value, yes or no, significant or not. Game probability analysis has its own requirements. Pre-data procedures require that we complete what is called a priori procedure, APP, to determine the sample size. And the post-data collection procedure requires that we conduct gains probability analysis and then draw gains probability diagrams to interpret group differences. Further details will be provided in the written version of the presentation on how this is done. For Bayesian analysis, pre-data and post-data procedures include determining priors and or prior odds before data collection, and after data collection, we determine posterior odds for comparison. Now, Bayesian analysis is usually recommended for theory testing, but a cursory look at the target articles from Lee's review, Lee and Etar's review, shows that only 3 papers have any background that suggests theory. Although only 3 of the target articles relate to theory, as indicated, the academic help-seeking behavior literature does provide areas of opportunities for theory testing, including various models of self-regulated learning closely associated with Albert Bandura's social learning theory and self-presentation theory. Both of these and other theories can be tested using either the gain probability analysis or Bayesian analysis, both of which are amenable to theory testing, unlike NHST. Their further consideration, however, is beyond the scope of the present presentation. Finally, the person effect sizes that would be appropriate for large N with no inferential statistics has no pre-data collection or post-data collection issues whatsoever. In conclusion, from the foregoing, it is clear that when research questions drive research design, either large N or small n designs may be called for. Experimentation may be between subjects or within subjects when large N designs are used. Use of inferential statistics depends primarily on the design used indicated by the research design. Finally, the process approach adopted here provides more avenues for experimental work on academic help-seeking behavior that appears presently minimal in the reviewed literature. Thank you for your attention.